There are encounters that transcend time, logic, and reason. People arrive as if they had always been there, awakening something deep and inexplicable within us. It's not merely chemistry or simple affinity. It's as if two souls recognize each other in silence, as if they come from the same invisible place and return to one another. When two souls are aligned, the world around them seems to transform. Silences become eloquent, glances carry ancient truths, and even suffering takes on a new meaning. These signs are not mere coincidences, but revelations. Depth psychology offers us precious keys to understand them. Today you will discover how to identify these hidden signs and what they reveal about your inner journey. If you have ever felt this kind of connection, comment below. I recognize the soul that walks with me. From Carl Jung's perspective, encounters that deeply mark our soul reflect something much greater than mere chance. When two souls are aligned, there is an intertwining of unconscious processes that reveal hidden parts of ourselves. According to Jung, every significant relationship activates contents of the unconscious, primarily the shadow, the anima, the animus, and the mechanisms of projection. Projection is the first sign. When we see in another person qualities or flaws that we do not recognize in ourselves, we are projecting aspects of our psyche. In a relationship of aligned souls, this projection is not merely distortion, it is also a mirror. We see in the other what needs to be integrated within us. The shadow manifests in these encounters as an invitation to transformation. It displays our wounds, fears, and hidden desires, and instead of fleeing, we are called to face and embrace them. The presence of the anima and the animus, the archetypes of the feminine in a man and the masculine in a woman, also stands out. They are bridges between the conscious and the unconscious. When one soul truly resonates with another, it is common to feel that these polarities merge. This symbolic union points to the process of individuation, becoming whole. Aligned souls do not complete one another in a romantic sense, but reflect and awaken each other's highest potential. These connections are not merely emotional, they are catalysts for evolution. The other becomes a sacred mirror of our inner journey, revealing with intensity everything that needs to emerge, light and shadow. The meaningful encounters we have throughout life often function as symbolic mirrors of our own psyche. Jung stated that every deep relationship is, above all, a relationship with the unconscious itself. When two souls align, the other becomes a living bridge to the reunion with the self, the organizing core of the psyche that transcends the ego and guides the individuation process. In an encounter where there is true alignment, there is also a sense of returning. It is as if, by looking at the other, we recognize parts of ourselves that were forgotten, neglected, or repressed. This feeling of familiarity is not a coincidence. It reflects the archetypal functioning of the psyche, where symbols, images, and patterns emerge from the collective unconscious and shape the deepest human experiences. The other embodies something we lack, or something we never allowed to fully blossom within us. This reconnection with the self through the other is not a comfortable or easy process. On the contrary, it often comes accompanied by emotional turbulence, since the ego feels threatened when confronted with its incompleteness. But it is precisely this tension that paves the way for transformation. The other invites us to transcend the limits of the superficial self and dive into the deepest layers of our existence. These relationships are not based solely on apparent harmony, but on a true confrontation with what is essential. They destabilize us because they shatter the illusion of control. The other shows us what we need to see, even if it hurts. And by welcoming this reflection instead of rejecting it, we take a decisive step toward reconciling with our own inner center. For Jung, the self is a symbol of psychic totality. It is not an idealized state, but a continuous process of integrating internal opposites, light and shadow, reason and emotion, masculine and feminine. When we stand before a soul aligned with ours, this process intensifies. There is an acceleration in the journey of self-knowledge because the other acts as an activator of unconscious contents that need to emerge into consciousness. Many report that these connections awaken gifts, sensitivities, or intuitions that were previously dormant. This happens because, in symbolic terms, psychic energy begins to circulate more broadly, breaking through blockages and restoring internal bonds. The other does not give us anything we did not already have in essence. They simply reveal what was already within us, but covered by the defenses of the ego. That is why encounters of aligned souls are not limited to romances or affinities. They are, in fact, encounters with the sacred. And the sacred, in Jung's language, is everything that touches the unconscious deeply and moves us toward totality. These are experiences that cannot be fully explained, but only lived with surrender, courage, and humility. When we recognize the other as a mirror of the self, we cease to idealize them or blame them for our pain. We see in them a journey partner, someone who takes part in our passage toward wholeness. This awareness transforms the relationship into a fertile field of psychic and spiritual growth. Even if that person does not remain with us forever, their presence will have already fulfilled an essential role, reconnecting us with what we are in essence. Therefore, when you perceive signs that your soul is aligned with someone else's, ask yourself not only what that person brings into your life, but what they awaken in your soul. Ask yourself if there is growth, revelation, depth. True soul alignment is, above all, a call to reconnection with the self, and few calls are as sacred as this. When two souls are truly aligned, there is an almost silent manifestation of symbols and signs that go far beyond the surface of human behavior. These signs are not random. They are archetypal expressions that arise from the collective unconscious, as described by Jung. They reveal themselves in small gestures, in seemingly fortuitous encounters, in shared dreams, in synchronicities that defy logic. Above all, they appear in a profound sense of meaning. The first major sign is synchronicity. Jung used this term to describe meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by a cause and effect relationship, but carry such strong symbolic value that they become revelations. When two people are spiritually connected, life seems to conspire to bring them together. Words spoken at the same time, simultaneous thoughts, identical reactions to different situations, all of this points to an archetypal connection operating in the background of visible reality. Another sign is the sensation of altered time. When you are before an aligned soul, time seems to lose its linear rigidity. Minutes become hours, and hours pass like seconds. This distortion of temporal perception is related to the emotional and symbolic activation of the unconscious. It is as if the encounter between these souls suspends ordinary time and places both in a symbolic dimension where everything gains depth and density. There is also the experience of recurring or shared dreams. Dreams, according to Jung, are the privileged language of the unconscious. In deeply connected relationships, it is common for similar symbols to appear in the dreams of both people. These symbols can reveal messages, challenges, or even confirmations of the existing bond. When two souls are aligned, their unconscious minds converse, and this dialogue often goes beyond the realm of consciousness. A third sign is immediate recognition. The feeling of having known someone before, even without having seen them, is a classic archetypal marker. This phenomenon is linked to the activation of archetypes like the anima and animus. When we meet someone who intensely represents a deep and symbolic aspect of our psyche, we feel that we have been there before, even if we do not know when or where. It is not necessarily about reincarnation, but about archetypal recognition. The soul reacts because something essential has been touched. Another indicator is the elevation of dialogue. Conversations do not remain on the surface. There is a natural inclination toward depth, truth, and mutual self-knowledge. It is as if both souls disrobe spontaneously, without effort, because they feel that there is safety and acceptance. Jung spoke about the importance of relationships that promote the emergence of the self, and this kind of authentic dialogue is one of the main channels for that to happen. Also manifest is the sense of healing. Relationships between aligned souls often have a strong restorative component. Wounds that have been open for years begin, even if slowly, to heal. This happens because the other acts as a mirror and also as a channel of symbolic energy. By touching our pains with presence and love, they help us reintegrate parts of ourselves that were fragmented. This does not mean that the other is responsible for the healing, but rather that they actively participate in the process as a catalyst. These signs, although invisible to the common eye, are profoundly tangible to the soul. They cannot be forced or artificially reproduced. They emerge naturally because they are an expression of what is true. When experienced, they leave no doubt. The soul recognizes them before the mind comprehends them. Therefore, learning to read the archetypal signs is essential to understand when a connection goes beyond the surface. They are symbolic beacons indicating that there exists a fertile field for transformation, growth, and deepening. It is not about idealizing the other or expecting perfection, but about recognizing that certain encounters are much more than human relationships. They are reunions of the soul with its own essence, reflected in the living mirror of the other. Every deep encounter carries within it a tension between what we want to show and what we try to hide. When two souls are aligned, this tension intensifies because the bond is based not only on conscious affinities, but also on what is hidden, that which Jung called the shadow. The shadow represents the rejected or repressed aspects of the psyche, everything that the ego refuses to see but that continues to operate silently from the unconscious. In true relationships, it always comes to the surface. Contrary to what many imagine, the shadow is not purely negative. It contains everything that was excluded from consciousness, including talents, desires, emotions, and impulses that did not fit into the ideal personality we constructed. When we relate to someone whose soul is aligned with ours, that person inevitably touches those forgotten layers, not out of malice or intention, but because deep connection demands wholeness, not just superficial harmony. It is at this moment that many relationships become challenging. The other begins to reflect our own internal conflicts, and this can generate resistance, fear, and rejection. But this tension is, in fact, the beginning of a profound transformation. The aligned soul invites us to cross through the shadow, not to flee from it. It is as if when looking into the other's eyes, we see what we need to heal, integrate, and embrace. Jung stated that the shadow is the gateway to access the self. This means that confronting it does not destroy us, but reveals us. In a relationship of aligned souls, this revelation is amplified. The other becomes an agent of transmutation. They awaken in us what was dormant, not to cause us pain, but so that we can become more whole and true. One of the strongest signs that there is alignment between souls is precisely the ability to traverse together the dark aspects of the psyche. This requires courage and presence, because the shadow does not appear in a direct form. It hides in intense emotional reactions, in judgments, and in behaviors we do not immediately understand. Often the anger, envy, jealousy, or fear we feel toward the other are manifestations of our own shadow being activated. The key is to realize that these emotions are not against the other, but about ourselves. The other merely turned on the light in a dark room we avoided entering. And if we can sustain that gaze, if we have beside us someone willing to stay even in the face of turmoil, then there is room for a psychic alchemy. Pain transforms into learning, conflict into expansion, and judgment into acceptance. On this journey, empathy and self-knowledge are fundamental. Recognizing one's own shadow is the first step towards ceasing to project it onto the other. And when both people in the relationship are willing to undergo this process, something rare is born. A safe space where everything can be seen, without masks, without filters, without fear. The relationship transforms into a symbolic field of mutual healing. It is important to say that this process is not linear. There are setbacks, resistances, and moments of distance. After all, looking at the shadow is a constant and challenging task. But even in periods of crisis, if there is true love and awareness, the bond remains. And this bond strengthens because it is not based on illusions, but on truth and transformation. The shadow, once integrated, releases a tremendous amount of psychic energy. Everything that was being expended to keep certain parts of ourselves repressed can now be directed toward creation, expression, and love. And this movement directly impacts the relationship. It becomes freer, more authentic, more alive. There is no longer a need to control or hide. Instead, there is a deep trust that everything can be looked at and that nothing needs to be denied. Thus, in relationships where there is real soul alignment, the shadow is not an obstacle, but a portal. A silent call for us to grow, not despite the other, but with them. And this journey, though arduous, is one of the most liberating that the soul can undertake. Individuation, in Carl Jung's psychology, is the process by which the individual becomes what they are in essence, a psychic totality that integrates internal opposites and transcends the ego's conditioning. This path is solitary in many respects, but it does not occur in isolation. Relationships, especially those marked by deep soul alignment, act as catalysts for this process. And love, when lived consciously, becomes one of the most powerful vehicles of individuation. To love in this context is not to fill the void with the presence of the other, nor to project expectations of salvation. To love is to see and accept the other in their wholeness, with their lights and shadows, and to allow them to see who we truly are. This kind of love does not feed idealizations, but rather revelations. And when two souls align under this principle, the relationship ceases to be merely a space of affection and becomes a psychic laboratory where one experiences one's own completeness. Jung saw in love a symbolic field for integrating the archetypes of the anima and the animus. When we relate to someone who resonates deeply with us, that person often personifies the unconscious part we need to integrate. The man sees in the woman his anima, his soul, his emotional, intuitive, receptive side. The woman sees in the man her animus, her strength, reason, inner direction, but this encounter becomes transformative only when these figures are not merely projected onto the other, but recognized as parts of oneself. Thus, conscious love leads us to integration. We realize that what we seek in the other is in fact a reflection of what is latent within us. By loving, we learn to love ourselves more completely. And in this reciprocal movement, the barriers between the self and the other begin to dissolve without nullifying individuality. A new quality of relationship emerges, one that does not depend on fusion, but flourishes in full presence and shared autonomy. This kind of love does not eliminate conflicts, but re-signifies them. Each disagreement becomes an opportunity for growth, each crisis a call to depth. Because when the goal is not to change the other, but to understand oneself through the other, the relationship transforms into a spiritual practice. It is at this point that love aligns with individuation. It not only accompanies the process, but propels it. There is a moment in relationships between aligned souls when we realize that the true meaning of the connection is not to satisfy superficial desires, but to reveal inner truths. This love is not free from pain, but neither is it dominated by it. It is mature enough to endure ruptures and generous enough to allow both souls to flourish, even if in different directions. The bond is spiritual and therefore transcends external forms. Individuation does not distance us from love. On the contrary, it prepares us for it. We can only love truly when we stop using the other as support for our emptiness and begin to walk side by side as two whole beings, conscious of their wounds and potentials. And this is only possible when the relationship is seen as part of the journey, not as the destination. In the presence of an aligned soul, this process accelerates. Emotional frequency, symbolic surrender, openness to self-knowledge, everything favors mutual transformation. There is no longer a need to control or possess. What matters is to grow together or apart toward inner truth. And this love, which is born from psychic depth, remains alive even when the physical bond dissolves, because its essence is timeless. Thus, individuation, far from being a cold or isolated path, reveals itself as the most sublime form of love. A love that does not demand, does not bind, does not distort, but reveals, liberates, and integrates. And when two souls meet at that frequency, the world around may remain the same, but the internal universe expands forever. At certain moments in life, we cross paths with someone who not only attracts us, but transforms us. These encounters are not trivial. They are living manifestations of the unconscious that call us to look inward with greater truth. When two souls are aligned, it is not about perfection, but about depth. The other does not come to complete, but to reveal. And in that reflection, we are invited to integrate, to grow, and above all, to love with greater awareness. The Jungian journey shows us that the soul recognizes what the mind tries to rationalize. Synchronicities, symbols, intense emotions all come together as a great archetypal mosaic that points toward the reunion with the self. The relationship then becomes mirror, school, and sanctuary, and love, when lived as a path of individuation, ceases to be mere need and becomes a creative force. If these ideas have touched something in you, subscribe to the channel now. There is much more content waiting for you to accompany you on this journey of self-knowledge and transformation. And do not forget, click the video next to this one to delve even deeper into what you have just discovered. Your soul is searching. Listen to this call.